Your Ansible playbook just stopped after the first 5 hosts, all because of a stale lock file. The task that should have ignored it was missing ignore errors, and any errors fatal was set to true. Let's break down Ansible Error Handling, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. Ansible Error Handling refers to the mechanisms that control how Ansible responds when a task fails or returns an unexpected status. By default, Ansible stops executing tasks on a host if any task fails. But production playbooks need fine-grained control. You might want to ignore certain failures, define custom failure conditions based on command output, or override the changed status. The core directives are ignore errors, failed when, changed when, and the block rescue always pattern. Additionally, any errors fatal and max fail percentage control play-level failure propagation. The ignore errors directive tells Ansible to continue executing tasks on a host even if the current task fails. It's a blunt instrument. Use it for non-critical checks, like verifying a service is running where you have a fallback. Never use it to hide real failures. It masks the error and still marks the task as failed and output with ignoring. A better pattern is to use failed when with a condition that never matches, but that's an anti-pattern. Here's a real example. We attempt to stop services that might not exist. We use ignore errors, yes, because we expect some services to be missing. The play continues, and we then display any failures that were ignored. This pattern is useful for optional tasks. Failed when overrides Ansible's default failure detection. You provide a Jinya2 expression that evaluates to true when the task should be considered failed. This is essential for commands that return non-zero on success, like grep returning 1 for no match, or for complex checks based on stdout/stdare. Here we check if an application is healthy by making an HTTP request. We define custom failure conditions. The task fails if the status is not 200 or if the response content does not contain healthy. This gives us precise control over what constitutes a failure. Changed when controls whether a task reports changed or OK. By default, Ansible considers a task changed if it modifies state. For commands that always return changed, you can override. If you want a task to never report changed, use changed when false. However, be careful. If a task that should change things never reports changed, you lose audit trail. Here we run a deployment script that always returns changed. We use changed when to only report changed if the output contains deployed. This prevents false change notifications and unnecessary handler triggers. The block rescue always pattern provides structured error handling for a group of tasks. Block contains the main tasks. If any task in the block fails, the rescue block executes. The always block runs regardless of success or failure. This is perfect for cleanup operations. Here we attempt to deploy an application. If the deployment fails, the rescue block rolls back to a backup and notifies a restart. The always block cleans up temporary files regardless of success or failure. This pattern is essential for atomic operations. By default, if a task fails on a host, Ansible stops executing further tasks on that host but continues on other hosts. Setting any errors fatal, true changes this. If any task fails on any host, the entire play stops immediately for all hosts. This is useful when a failure on one host indicates a systemic issue that should halt the entire deployment. Here we set any errors fatal, true for a critical configuration update. If the template task fails on any host, the entire play stops immediately. This prevents a bad config from spreading. However, combine it with serial to avoid taking down the entire fleet on a single failure. Max fail percentage is a play-level directive that sets the maximum percentage of hosts that can fail before Ansible aborts the entire play. It's typically used with serial for rolling updates. If more than the specified percentage of hosts in a batch fail, the play stops. This prevents a bad deployment from taking down too many hosts. Here we perform a rolling update with serial, 2 and max fail percentage, 25. If more than 25% of the hosts in a batch fail, i.e., 1 out of 2, the play stops. We also use until retries and delay to retry on transient failures. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. The playbook had a task that checked for a lock file. During a refactor, a junior engineer commented out ignore errors. Yes on that task, thinking it was dead code. Meanwhile, the play had any errors fatal, true set. When the stale lock file existed, the task failed, and because any errors fatal was true, the entire play stopped after the first batch of 5 hosts. This caused 30 minutes of downtime. A stale lock file caused failures on multiple hosts. The play aborted because ignore errors was removed, and any errors fatal was true. The fix was straightforward. We re-added ignore errors, yes to the lock file check task, and changed any errors fatal to false. We also added a rescue block to delete the stale lock file if the deployment failed. Now, if the lock file exists, the task fails but is ignored, and the play continues. The rescue block cleans up the lock file, preventing future issues. This is the exact line that caused the incident. The ignore errors, yes, was commented out, so when the lock file existed, the task failed and the play aborted. Always document why a task is ignored and never remove error handling without understanding the consequences. A common mistake is setting any errors fatal, true without serial, causing all hosts to fail if one has a transient issue. Always combine with serial, one or a small batch size to limit blast radius. A common pitfall is using ignore errors to suppress all failures without understanding the cause. The task shows failed, ignoring, but the play continues and real failures go unnoticed. Always prefer failed when with specific conditions or register and handle failures explicitly. A common gotcha, failed when is evaluated after the task runs. If the task fails before running, e.g. invalid parameters, failed when is not evaluated. Also, failed when and ignore errors interact. If both are set, ignore errors takes precedence, but the task is still marked failed if failed when is true, then ignored. Important, failures like unreachable host, invalid privilege escalation, or syntax error are not caught by rescue. Only task-level execution failures are caught. Also, if a rescue task fails, the play will fail, potentially masking the original error. Add ignore errors. Yes to non-critical rescue tasks like notifications. The block rescue always pattern is available since Ansible 2. However, note that rescue blocks do not catch failures from unreachable hosts or privilege escalation errors, only task execution failures. This behavior is consistent across all recent versions. The article mentions skipping a host in rescue but doesn't show how. Use meta, end host to stop executing tasks on the current host after a failure, while the play continues on other hosts. Max fail percentage is calculated per batch when used with serial, not globally. For example, with serial, 10 and max fail percentage, 20, if 3 out of 10 hosts fail in a batch 30%, the play aborts, even if only 3% of total hosts have failed. This can cause premature abortion in large fleets. To debug error handling issues, first check if ignore errors is set unintentionally. Use Ansible Playbook, VVV, to see failed when evaluation. In CI, create test playbooks that intentionally fail to verify your error paths. Use Ansible lint to catch misused directives. Here's a simple CI script that runs a playbook check and fails if any task fails. Let's run through some common interview questions. What is the difference between ignore errors and failed when? Ignore errors continues on failure. Failed when defines custom failure conditions. How does block rescue always work? Block, main tasks rescue, on failure always, regardless, like try catch finally. What is the purpose of any errors fatal and max fail percentage? Any errors fatal stops play on any failure. Max fail percentage aborts if failure percent exceeds threshold per batch. And a few frequently asked questions. Can I use ignore errors to suppress failure display? No, task still shows as failed. Use register and when for conditional logic. Does rescue catch unreachable hosts? No, only task execution failures. Unreachable hosts are not caught. What happens if a rescue task fails? The play fails, masking the original error. Add ignore errors to non-critical rescue tasks. Let's recap the key takeaways. Use ignore errors sparingly, prefer failed when. Block rescue always for try catch finally. Any errors fatal with serial to limit blast radius. Test error paths in CI. Ready to go deeper? Up next, Ansible file management modules, then Ansible package and service modules, then Ansible command and shell modules, and Ansible dynamic inventory. Find them all at thecodeforge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at thecodeforge.io.